thinking about AI necessarily requires thinking about what you will do in these scenarios where AI picks up something and you miss it, and AI says something is absolutely fine and you are running into automation bias, and you still keep your wits around you for something that is actually positive. Risk-calibrated governance. When countries like India are using AI to leapfrog, we have to use AI in innovative ways. And we can't always be super cautious. There is potential for misuse of data. But we all work together to maximize the benefit and minimize the harm and take responsibility in a transparent way. That's far better than creating policies to restrict use of data.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Oliver Morgan, and our guest today is Dr. Anurag Agrawal, a physician scientist and leading expert in respiratory biology, genomics, and data-driven health systems. He is currently Professor and Dean of Biosciences and Health Research at Ashoka University and serves as Vice President of Science Policy at the Indian National Science Academy. Great to have you on the podcast, Anurag. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Anurag, I thought it'd be great if we just started actually by going back to the COVID-19 experience and really drawing on some of your kind of lived experiences around using data to drive decisions in real public health emergencies. And in particular, you really led a lot of the work, both in India and globally, on tracking and understanding new variants of SARS-CoV-2 as they emerged. Can you maybe talk us through a little bit about that experience and what it maybe revealed about the difference between having data and being able to turn that into actionable knowledge?
Thanks, Oliver. It's a story that always makes one think how much better we could have done if you knew then what we know now. But you can't go back in time, so I'll just trace the journey from our side. So when SARS-CoV-2 came out, we all saw the initial sequences, Virologica, huge amount of debate, lab virus, some other virus, every kind of theory floating around. And I remember in India, when the first case came, India had been put under lockdown. We were trying to contain the spread. Sequencing was happening by the Indian Council of Medical Research. The samples were not really being easily sent across the country. And that's a time when many people in the country who were not genomics people, but infectious disease people, felt that, fine, this virus is mostly the similar across cases. Nothing looks particularly changing. We should be fine. And whether or not genomic surveillance was not an easy decision that everybody agreed to. Those of us who had a little bit more public health exposure had seen previously the use of genomics in answering important questions. If nothing else, simply tracking down where something that is suddenly increasing is coming for, would advocate for more sequencing. But then against that, you have to think of this as India at a time when flights are not flowing around the world, reagents are difficult to find, and everything has to have an effectiveness constraint around it. So we agreed to do a minimal amount of sequencing every time something interesting came around. And for the most of what you would say the beginning of the pandemic, things ran pretty much on expected courses. And I would actually argue that India weathered that initial time quite well. We were able to basically get over with the lockdown, limited spread, limited mortality. When the world was worrying about, people dying on the streets, we went off fine. In this time, sequencing was still a staccato effort. Different labs with different accesses to samples from around the country were doing it. And somewhere towards the end of the year, we decided that the right way to do it is for a national consortium to be created. Institutes like mine, which were primarily genomics institutes, led one side of it. Institutes like the National Center for Disease Control, which is India's CDC, would lead the clinical side of it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, genomics is meaningless without the clinical data. And a change in clinical is meaningless without genomics. And so by the time 2020 comes, 21 comes, We have become reasonably good at it. And we are worried about all these variants coming up around the world. You saw what happened in South America. Then Alpha came, and we have lots of travelers in India from UK. We are very busy doing airport sequencing. We, in fact, set up the first airport sequencing lab in India. And we are really worried about Alpha. And we are thinking, oh, I hope Alpha does not come to India. Where things went wrong is while we were so focused on Alpha, I wish we had thought back and said, look, if a country of a few million people creates these variants, a country of 1 billion people with lots of infections will create even more variants. And although we were sequencing, the pace of analysis and so on, we got to Delta only around the time that the clinical impacts of Delta started around the world. And while we could see it happening in a variety of means, we could see the genome sequence first. But as you know, genome sequence is not enough to tell us this virus would be as deadly as it turned out to be. Not a single mutation of Delta, just by looking at it, would have told us how bad it was going to be. On the other hand, we were starting to have clinical data collection, which ran in parallel as opposed to completely integrated, where we were seeing vaccinated people undergoing breakthroughs. But given the size and density of India, by the time we could put 2 and 2 together, the wave was already starting. And then, of course, it didn't end that well anywhere in the world and was particularly bad in India for a few weeks when we were struggling to build in the medical infrastructure. But thankfully, from that point onwards, 2 things occurred. A, we became very good at making sure that we continue to sequence even when things look okay. And second, of course, we now know that type 2 SARS-CoV-2, Omicron happens. And that's the time I was working more closely with WHO. And that was an instance where just looking at the genome told you how different this virus was going to be. And of course, we do not know whether it's going to be deadly or not deadly, but we knew it was going to be so massively mutated that breakthrough infections were going to just go through the roof. And it did. But thankfully, I guess the amount of immunity built up in the world, vaccines had come, things like this, was sufficient that except in a few areas, things didn't go badly. But from my point of view, sitting in India, this was a more orchestrated, well-rehearsed response. Even if Omicron had turned out to be more dangerous than it actually turned out to be, I can confidently say that in this phase of use of public health genomics, India would have come out great. And since then, we have been doing well with wastewater sequencing, routine sequencing of a sample of known respiratory disease, unknown respiratory disease, and all the organizations across India, the Indian Council of Medical Research, the CDC, the departments of biotechnology have all come together. So that's roughly how it was.
I mean, it's a fascinating experience to have lived through and led a lot of this work. I mean, if I understand correctly, there are more than 50, or at that time, there were at least more than 50 laboratories around India doing pathogen sequencing for SARS-CoV-2. And as you mentioned, to understand the sequence information, you also need other clinical information and epidemiological information as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you went about building that data infrastructure that allowed you to look at this in real time and maybe distill a couple of lessons, because I think we were all doing this under a lot of pressure and the timelines were much more compressed than they would have normally been. But as you said, it's kind of left us with at least a better understanding of what the data infrastructure should be like that we need when we're developing our public health intelligence programs. But what did you learn about the data infrastructure through this experience in India?
What we learned, I don't think we have fully solved yet. But the first part we learned was about sharing genomic data, which is easy. I'll be very honest with you. Learning to share genomic data with GISAID being available and things like that was actually trivial looking back. The trouble was always relating the genomic data to clinical data. Now, clinical data came in 2 flavors. One, the WHO format that Indian CDC also follows, where we write down details of patients and severities and things like this. But to be honest, what you're really trying to see is it is spreading more rapidly. Is it happening as breakthroughs? And are there second infections in people previously infected? I think it's very tough because standard clinical data does not answer these questions for you. In a virus that even in a wave, less than 10% of the people experience significant symptoms. In a country where most people ignore symptoms, which are minor, to really know who is getting infected a second time, having a repeat infection, without extensive background antigen testings and things like this to detect asymptomatic infections. Without that, your clinical side data isn't really complete if it is routinely collected data. So what we came up with, and this is the part that I think got started late, you need cohorts. You need cohorts in which a systematic routine testing is happening, data is being recorded, and data is being shared. India did have the cohorts, but the data of these cohorts was not integrated with the other genomic data, the routine public health surveillance data. So we would have guests on the meetings coming and telling us about what they were seeing. But as you can also imagine that this is a noisy type of a way to do this. And sometimes you would overreact, sometimes you would underreact. I can't think of the number of times in the time after Delta with a different AY.X's, when something would come, somebody would say, we are seeing some infections when it turns out to be false. And if you cry wolf too often, everybody stops listening to you. It was difficult. In an ideal world, I would say electronic health records, if a nation has, it can integrate their genomics with data flowing through their EHRs. And UK, to my mind, is one of the very few places that did the things well. They could bring out bulletins every week with ER visits, admissions, things like this, because they could mine the data flowing electronically in their system. That was not possible for us to do then. It is not possible for us to do now. But we are much closer today than we used to be then because of something called Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission and a recent move towards personal health records, completely interoperable, but this is still work in progress. And I think for the time being, we'll continue to do public health surveillance, the WHO style data integration. But as you know well, it does not integrate perfectly well with genomes yet. So it is still a group effort of people coming together and talking to each other. It works, but it can be better.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, and all of us learned a lot as you went through, and I think the pandemic revealed a lot of the kind of gaps that we had in our systems, whether it's with the cohorts as you mentioned, or even just the routine electronic medical records. And linking those to the genomic sequencing data of different pathogens. It's all kind of work in progress, as you said, but getting better, I hope, by the month and by the year. But, if we cast our minds back to that period, this was a little bit before we had access to AI tools, or at least AI tools that were perhaps good enough to make a difference. And now in 2026, of course, we have all of these amazing AI tools developing faster than we can really keep up with. How do you think the AI developments can feed into this ongoing process of hardening or strengthening our public health intelligence data infrastructure across our healthcare systems?
I think this is the direction for the future. Because the simple sheer magnitude of flow of information, particularly if anyone is doing shotgun sequencing of wastewater, most of us are not. We are still doing targeted sequencing of wastewater using some kind of amplification of targets we want to do. Just throws up so much data that forget assembly. Even if we knew exactly what the sequences were, the new mutations, we would have a tough time saying. To me, I always do it in a thought experiment. If I could take today's AI, but unfortunately, if I take foundation AI, it has already read all kinds of genomic data, and I cannot ensure lack of contamination. But if I were to train a foundation model from scratch, on data except SARS-CoV-2 data, and then expose it to data as it comes and say, can you pick up the ones at which point clearly there is something new and important? Will it be able to do it? We know now that if I were to feed in the data that includes recent alpha folds and all that, it almost certainly would, because you can see clear changes to the critical binding sites and some of those things. And obviously, even a trivial AI or even a semi-blind genomics person could figure it out for Omicron. But I think AI is the way forward on this. I think foundation models trained on multitudes of genomes, for example, if you look at Evo2 from NVIDIA, trained on trillions of tokens, being able to look at a mutation and tell us what's the likely impact of the mutation, even at the scale of complex genomes like humans, is certainly more than capable, in theory, of handling a viral genome. Now comes the key question that I struggle with. AI is really good for things within its distributions, but is terrible at the tails. Now, is SARS-CoV-2 starting, not SARS-CoV-2 in the middle of the pandemic? A brand new SARS-CoV-2, which is a tail distribution, the AI has never seen it because no one has seen it. How would it do? And we have played with these things. It's not even that I still don't think it's good enough, because we are good with AI at predicting patterns from things similar to what we have trained the AI on. But if you throw something completely left field, which is beyond the range of data it has been trained on, it'll give you very weird predictions. If you start accepting them routinely, there'll be false positives, they'll be very high to get an acceptable amount of false, the usual sensitivity, specificity trade-off that we all struggle with. And the only answer to my mind is that AI will filter through all these things, throw out a lot of alerts at a setting in which we keep sensitivity high, specificity low. These would not reach communication to the public, otherwise there'll be panic every other day. A set of people with deeper understanding of subjects would, the equivalent of human in the loop of health AI, but here not just human in the loop, but human on the loop, looking at statistical trends, very carefully debating and calibrating public health messaging on the public side, but remaining very open to discussion on the scientist side. Now, I know this sounds like a really ideal world, and I know that leaks occur everywhere and public goes into frenzy and everything has to be carefully controlled. And sooner or later, you will go wrong. And I mean, I'm deviating slightly on a tangent here, but my wife's a radiologist. Recently, she had a case where the AI said the case is positive. She thought it was a negative, ultimately turned out to be a positive. And then, of course, there is hell to pay, right? So these mistakes will also occur. And the ones where the AI said something bad was coming, and we said, don't worry about it, there is not enough data yet, and later on we turn out to be wrong, I mean, we have to start thinking of how we will deal with it when it comes. I think thinking about AI necessarily requires thinking about what you will do in these scenarios where AI picks up something and you miss it, and AI says something is absolutely fine and you are running into automation bias, and you still keep your wits around you for something that is actually positive.
I think that's fascinating, really. I've read around various commentators talking about the role of AI in scientific discovery. And just as you said, AI models tend to, reinforce what we already know, but not be so good at thinking outside the box, as it were, and looking for new patterns. Although there are approaches and methods that are being kind of developed, which, are intended to kind of be exploratory, but they're not really available for necessarily users like you and myself, or even most governments at this point. I mean, what type of work do you think we need to do to kind of get us beyond the kind of pattern recognition strength of AI and into a world where we can use AI tools to more sensibly look at either outliers or edge cases or new hypotheses, which of course is really at the core of the epidemic intelligence process, is trying to pick out the unusual needle in the haystack?
No, I think that's a great question. I'm going to borrow from what a discussion I had with one of my computer science colleagues. He told me with very correctly that there is apparently an algorithmic proof that a computer cannot invent knowledge. And I told him that we come from a field where knowledge, include new knowledge, includes stuff that was sitting there for everyone to see and nobody saw it yet. There is real brand new knowledge which a computer may not be able to invent. Then there are patterns that should have been discovered but haven't been discovered. And at least in the area we both work in, Oliver, biomedicine, finding a pattern that was sitting there in the data and nobody saw it, and we see it for the first time, we call it discovery. So in our world, computers can discover new things, which you were alluding to when you talked about the extremely sensitive pattern recognition of the encoding, decoding of the generative AI, and people are discovering new drugs using that approach. On the other hand, there are two important directions I believe the world is going, which I think sooner or later will enter biomedicine also well. I'll take the first one of Jan LeCun's idea of world models, and I'll trace it down to the simplest of the examples of a bullet flying. Now, you could learn how bullet trajectories look like from watching a bunch of movies in which bullets get fired. You might also watch The Matrix and a few other movies where bullets can do curves, and then problem would be there, or you could do base it on physics. So in Jan LeCun's world model, you don't just learn from patterns. There is real physics type knowledge behind it. Now, how far are we from that in medicine? I would say quite far. Physiology, and I am a physiologist, so in that sense, I love to say physiology is the closest thing you have to the physics of the body. But even in physiology, we go wrong from time to time. And we'll have to distinguish real knowledge of how the body works from our expectations of how the body works. Same at a lower level would work into organisms, microorganisms, but mini world models for microbes, for infections, for pneumonias need to be built. And I believe this is an easier path to success than the other path, which actually is new ways of representing knowledge so that computers can learn on their own. And there people talk about neurosymbolic reasoning. They talk about graph rags encoding knowledge on the back end. I personally think that Jan LeCun's world model approach is a more logical one. But I'm not a computer scientist. But I do think that by starting with small world models on isolated parts of infections, viruses, cell entry, you can make as small a micro world as you want. We can't model the entire universe anyway. So is the right way to go. And there are lots of dark matter problems we have. And one that, at least in my school, I've been talking about is the problem of, for example, glycans, right? You have seen recent work where we now know that many mutations in SARS-CoV-2 that didn't make sense probably occurred because the sugar binding to the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein changed. And we know that even sugar processing and binding, possibly different between people with diabetes and people without, may have explained important differences in how the virus behaved. And we never measure these things, right? So no matter if we used all the omics, glycomics, proteomics, the fact is most glycans are dark matter to us. So we need to get better on the molecular side. We need to get better on the CS side. Of course, we need to get better on every other data side. So lots of work to do, but at least we have a direction towards it.
Yeah, I think there's so many exciting avenues to explore. Actually, the team in Berlin has been looking at using graph databases as ways of finding new and unexpected signals, or at least unexpected relationships between entities within the graph database. And that's been quite interesting. It's still a bit experimental, but I think all of these options are worth exploring at this stage. And something that you said, which I've actually been interested in for a while, is the fact that we actually have a huge amount of data, maybe certainly in public health and medicine in general, that has been compiled over many decades, which we haven't really extracted all of the insights from, or even close to all, the majority of insights. And so I think AI could help us go back, help us assemble those data in a way that help us kind of understand what's in those data and interpret the new data that's being generated. So I think that's a very promising avenue for further exploration as well.
And to be very honest, AI can really cut down your time to go through data. And on a slight tangent, I've had an asthma cohort running since about 2010. Maybe if we started around 300 children being followed every 3 months, we were doing everything from oscillometry to spirometry to exhaled nitric oxide. And data built up. Some of the papers came out, and I almost had forgotten the cohort is still running at my collaborating medical institute. And one fine day, rather than waiting for the data to become perfect, someone to go through 12 years worth of data, I said, just send me the Excel. And I sat down with Claude. This is Opus, not the latest version. And between Opus, me, and looking through the data, browsing through typical errors, some people wrote in centimeters, some people wrote in inches, but we knew 2 facts of life for children. Children can't become shorter and they can't become younger. So you fix a bunch of errors. You identify all the 3 standard deviation points. You look at them manually. In 3 hours, I kid you not, we were done looking at the data into an organized format with insights being drawn. I truly believe with the kind of data that you possess, just the exercise of going through the data can be aided by AI models.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think we all have had the experience where we spend an inordinate amount of time going through the data, cleaning it up, and just getting it ready for analysis. And the analytic step is relatively short. So if we can have the data preparation step accelerated using AI tools, of course, we're at the data analytics step far quicker. And even that step can be done perhaps in a more automated way as well. So yes, I think for routine data work, I think we're entering into a very interesting and exciting period. I thought, it would be quite interesting for us to talk a little bit about some of the work that you've also been doing on biorisks. And I think this is an area that's getting increasing amount of attention, both in the kind of popular domain, but certainly in the scientific domain, where people are starting to wonder how AI might be used both for positive purposes, but also how they could be used maybe to generate new types of risks, and how we go about thinking about this. And I know that you've been publishing on this topic recently, so maybe you can help frame some of these issues for us.
Sure. And as you know, Oliver, a lot of these are thinking experiments. Delphi surveys, people get together, they think about things put together. So they are not the equivalent of hard scientific proofs. But if you take the scenario we all worry about, it's about a garage biotech type of a setup where a bad actor uses generative AI to create a dangerous virus and is effectively able to synthesize those nucleic acids and use the fact that injecting a nucleic acid is sufficient to do many things and create life. Ever since we had the first completely synthetic chromosome E. coli, we know that we can do this. Now, when we look at this, let's break it down into pieces. One, can someone reliably use generative AI to create a type of virus the world has never seen, to which we have no immunity? It comes back to my point about the AI of today still being good with the centers of the distribution, not that good with the tails. Even if you look at AI-inspired, AI-discovered antibiotics, most of them are still on frameworks that are reasonably reasonably old. The novelty, if at all, comes from humans saying put a D or an L where normally there is the opposite. But Many people worry about, can those things be degraded? We don't have the right enzymes. Personally, I don't worry too much about that particular part. A, the AI is not ready. B, it's a universe of shape. If the shape is such that can have an effect on a cell, there will be a corresponding shape recognition somewhere else that can probably act on it as well. I mean, it's almost impossible, no matter what you do, to think of them only as LNDs. Ultimately, it's all three-dimensional shape in some form. So I'm not too worried on that. The second part, if somebody were able to find a sequence that is dangerous, and that's very easy. You don't need AI to do it. There are plenty of naturally dangerous things for which we know sequences. Do you now have the type of biotech easy availability that people could build dangerous things? That one is yes. But if you now combine these two statements, our problem is not AI. Our problem is that there is already so much information out there, and synthesis capacity of malactors is sufficiently high that dangerous things can be made. And the other thing is, most of us are also realists. We know that because there is fear that somebody else will make such a dangerous thing, there will be other people trying to do the same thing on the defensive side for ostensibly good. What we at WHO would like to see is a world in which no one does it. But the odds are that, given the realities of how the world operates, people will always fear, if I don't do it, someone else does it. They'll go back and forth. I personally think that being alert to what is circulating in the environment and reacting fast, what we discussed previously, is probably a more pragmatic way around this. Basically, whatever is happening, if it leaks, then we need to worry. If it never leaks, it's in a wallet somewhere, which is not a problem. And I'm very certain we were to open every vault in this earth that contains things, we'll find not only the old dangers, we'll find plenty of new dangers. But I think currently, as of now, while AI is clearly a dual purpose technology, the ability of a garage door guy to use Gen AI to build something in his own garage and release it to the world is very small. The ability of accomplished scientists working in a directed program, given all resources of nations and organizations, to build something dangerous is very high, but has been high for a very long time. So in that sense, the world has not changed yet. When people sitting in their garage, using the mythos thing that we heard about, can hack into the websites of the dangerous government organizations and get their information, that we should worry about a bit more.
Yeah, that's a really helpful kind of leveler for us, I think, because I think there is a lot of hype around the ability of, as you say, somebody sitting in the garage to use AI to create biological agents. And I think exactly as you said, the process from going from a kind of a theoretical standpoint to actually being able to produce a biological agent is a completely different story and much more complex for the person in the garage. But as you say, these risks are many, and in the natural world, there are many biohazards, and we shouldn't let the theoretical AI-supported ones eclipse the risks that we're managing today. We can think of dozens of different risks, biological risks that we're already confronted with. But I guess not overestimating or overstating the kind of dual use risks from AI is also helpful. But also thinking about the cybersecurity aspects for existing national labs or national laboratory programs or pathogen discovery programs, I think is critically important as well. So I think we need to take a much more holistic approach to thinking about managing these risks. And I know that you're involved in some of the kind of governance discussions, at least in India, around some of these issues, and also from your position within the university, also discussing this at the international level. How do we think about these governance issues, especially as we have a scientific world that is evolving very quickly? Governments tend not to move as quickly as some of the tech world. So how do we think through the governance approaches that we need for 2026 and beyond?
So, One Health has become a really important and visible topic in India ever since the pandemic. It's always been there in theory. Now we actually have a National Institute for One Health, in which multiple ministries are stakeholders. In India, people at the boundary of forests continue to die of probably viral diseases that go either undiagnosed, and sometimes we don't even know necessarily who they are. Even where we know a particular virus exists in humans, and it could be KFT, it could be many other kinds of forest disease, even if when we do environmental sampling, we are not able to identify where exactly it is coming from. So for us, our policies recognize exactly what you said a minute ago. There are plenty of existing natural biological hazards, which we need to identify and which are real problems for us, not hypothetical ones. And we need to do better with that. So recently we were discussing who are the absolute top talents in putting together long read sequences from nanopores to identify fragments that might give us clues regarding what is the carrier of some of these viruses in these forests, where is it coming from. And I think for us, a lot of our thinking about AI technology applications is on these real problems. Then, of course, we are, like everyone else, coming up with policies regarding correct use of AI. There's already something we launched in February called the Strategy for AI for Health for India, which in Hindi means correct. So we are trying to define the right strategy for the country. There is a pillar within this, which is research. How should optimally AI enter into this, the ecosystems? So we are trying on the governance side to do this. Now, something very interesting about AI, and of course, when we wrote these lines into the strategy, speaking as a nation, we were not necessarily thinking about biohazards and AI, what we are talking about today. But there is still a line that's important, which is innovation over restraint. And the next line is risk-calibrated governance. So the logic is that when countries like India are using AI to leapfrog, to reach a level of service that normally only occurs after you become high income, then we have to use AI in innovative ways. And we can't always be super cautious. Oh no, we cannot do anything with this. And this also reminds me of a very nice article by Zach Cohen, if I got his name right, in the New England Journal, that the ethics should be based on the health system you have, not on the health system you wish you had. So in that sense, we are driven to innovate, to solve the problems. And that innovation, of course, is not going towards the dangerous territories we are talking about, but a general, more permissive attitude towards use of AI to solve problems. But the second part is equally important, risk-calibrated governance. There are areas where it is not dangerous. Trying to use AI to enable the Indian frontline healthcare worker in referrals to real doctors is low risk. What's the worst case scenario? You send a few more people than you should. But on the other hand, trying to use AI to generate new viruses or new things is the part that you really should not be doing. So we're very clearly emphasizing risk-calibrated governance of all matters of AI, permissive on one end, completely restricted on the other, and perhaps with a little bit less concern than I would say the West has on data sharing and things like this, to just make sure the system moves fast. Again, we are struggling with it. I'll be very honest, Oliver. I mean, after GDPR, after many other things, many countries are going the other direction. We do one step further. What we are going is, that I work on the digital transformation for health labs, earlier the Lancet Commission, on data solidarity. I think we are pushing, and I will say this personally as a university, because you asked me that as well. As a university that's a liberal arts universities, lots of people with the humanities in it. What we are saying is that data solidarity, where we all understand there is potential for misuse of data, but we all work together to maximize the benefit and minimize the harm and take responsibility in a transparent way. I think that's far better than creating policies to restrict use of data. Because what happens is that the people who didn't plan to listen to all the legal things are still free to do so. And all the good people who planned to be legal about how they went about it have been prevented from doing anything. So in that sense, we are trying to find the balance. I suspect it's a balance that all of us in the world are trying to find between cross-border sharing, international sharing, domestic priorities. But yeah, it's work in progress. It is totally work in progress, and I will not claim anything beyond that.
Yes, I think for better or for worse, I think for better, but I think AI is also pushing us in terms of data access and data openness as well, because of course the AI models not only need the data to be developed, but also need data to be run on for them to be useful. So having accessible data is a kind of prerequisite for developing utility out of these AI models. And it sounds like a super interesting and exciting environment in India, where you have a national AI strategy with a component of calibrated governance around that strategy or underpinning that strategy. Maybe just a couple of thoughts from you also about the investments that are needed. You're currently now in an academic setting, and clearly there are many different sectors within India in the public health domain investing in AI for public health benefits. I mean, how is the investment structured, and how does that component of the strategy come into place?
I'll preface what I say with something about the Indian way of doing it in general. India invested its digital transformation primarily on payments and ID. So we went there first. And I believe it was a pragmatic recognition that nobody would just pay for health. But if you are paying for the digital infrastructure backbone of the country that stimulates the economy by helping identification of the party easy and by facilitating payments, then people will find it very high on the return on investment. And then very soon the entire country will go digital. So India with Aadhaar as the national ID biometric and UPI as a payment interface, I can even transfer 10 cents from say me to you without any problem whatsoever, allowed us to build a digital backbone that spans the entire nation. Now we are leveraging the digital backbone to build the digital health. And then because data can flow across it, which we have not yet got it together right, to build the AI layers on top of it. The Indian vision is one where you regulate digital public infrastructure. To participate in using digital public infrastructure gives you a cost advantage. And everybody understands cost advantage. And therefore you agree to the rules that surround the digital public infrastructure. So you get voluntary compliance. And I think that's a smart way of going about it, because you could go it the China way, where you really control the entire ecosystem. You could go about it the European way, where you have hard policies with legal teeth. You could go it about American way, the technocratic way. But yeah, I mean, I think this is one more way of doing it. And this way, the investments flow automatically into the backbone. The nation subsidizes innovators. Innovators build layers on top of it at a lower cost. For a country like ours, without too much money, this was a pragmatic way of building it.
Yeah, I think there's, as you said, there are many different models of investing in our data infrastructure for health and public health, and AI is just one of those components, of course, but a vitally important one. So I think we'll see how the different efforts, develop over time, and maybe we can just kind of try and summarize the whole conversation by thinking about it's not really a hypothetical scenario, but we're as we've come through the COVID-19 pandemic, I think everybody is in agreement that the probability of another pandemic hasn't changed, or maybe it's increasing, and that we need to be ready for the next threat, whether it's a pandemic one or a regional threat or a national threat. And again, we could point to many ongoing public health kind of outbreaks that are ongoing right now, which need that investment. But where do you think we should place our focus on in this kind of intra-pandemic period? Is it the underlying data infrastructure? Is it the new models? Is it creating the national or international governance structure that allows us to leverage that? Is it all of it? Is it something else? Where should we put our investments?
My top answer after, all these years is a really mundane and trivial one, doing the small things. Because I can see in India, we have high-tech states and we have states that get the small things right. One of them is Kerala. All the disease we discover, all the early cases we pick up happen in that one state. It's not because it has the most disease. It is because it gets the small stuff right. Beyond getting the small stuff right, I think we need cooperation more than anything else. Because it is a lack of cooperation, and I would actually argue what we are seeing in Africa right now is a lack of global cooperation. And that's where I think agencies like WHO need to again go back to their strength in the past. And this again is a lack of global cooperation. WHO is global cooperation at one level. So I would put global cooperation at the absolute top of my agenda. Because without it, resources flow most in places where they're not needed and least where they're needed. And there is no version in this world in which until you correct it, anything else solves the problem.
Great. That's a wonderful place to wrap things up. I think taking us away from the hype and bringing us back down to earth. And of course, the small things are often the most important ones, as you said, and the human necessity to cooperate and collaborate to make sure that we share all of the insights when it comes to public health and public health intelligence in general is the most important beyond the tech. All of the tech is not going to help us if we don't work together. So thanks so much, Anurag. There's such an interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Pleasure to have a chat.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing your work progress and seeing how India's investments take your public health system forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. Be sure to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you next time.
The Innovation Forum AI podcast is produced by Zoila Leiva Rioja and brought to you by the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. We'd love to hear your feedback and ideas. Reach us at pandemichub@who.int.